Joining us for a conversation live on Bloomberg TV, the 79th Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. Secretary Bessent, it's good to see you, sir.
Jonathan, good to see you.
A warm congratulations from all of us to you. Quite an arrival from, what was it, Little River, South Carolina?
Yes, it's an American success story, only in America.
To the office of Alexander Hamilton with some unique experience. How is that going to help you, sir, approach some of the challenges in this economy?
Well, Jonathan, the way I look at it, for my career for 35 years, I've been sort of sitting outside the room with my ear up against the door or trying to look over the transom, trying to figure out what policymakers should do or going to do and how that would affect the markets. Now I'm inside the room trying to figure out what everybody outside the room expects us to do, how the market's going to react, and what the economic and market implications are short-term, but more importantly, medium-term, and how that's going to affect the underlying economy.
We've got a lot to discuss, so let's start with the debt market. What people expected you to do, maybe, was change some of the issuance for Treasury. Something that you'd said back last summer about then-Secretary Yellen was that Yellen had taken control of monetary policy through Treasury issuance. Then you're basically maintaining her plans. Can you help explain that? Help us understand where you're coming from.
Sure. So the previous administration shortened some of the duration, and we haven't shortened it further. We've just kept the policy in place. And I believe over the medium term, it's going to play out as it becomes clear that everything that President Trump's administration is doing will be disinflationary. We're going to bring down energy costs. We're going to bring down regulation. What DOGE is doing in terms of cost cutting. And I think once the Tax Cuts and Job Act is made permanent, then we can have a revenue increase, cost decrease, and as you said, as the nation's top bond salesman, I got a pretty good story.
So what's the medium term? Help me understand that. What is the medium term? And then once you see all those things, let's say those ambitions become reality, then do you start to think about terming out the debt?
Sure, but that's a long way off. And we're going to see what the market wants. As Lisa noted this morning, and it's fun to see someone who believes that Fed minutes are exciting. That the Fed said that they may stop their balance sheet runoff. So, easier for me to extend duration when I'm not competing with another big seller.
So when do you think that time would be? End of the year or further down into the administration's term?
Yeah, it's going to be path dependent. We're still seeing sort of the residual Biden inflation that's still coming through. And I think as the market starts to realize what we're doing and inflation starts to drop, then we will see. So it's going to be path dependent. That's the eventual goal, but I'm not going to signal it now.
When you mentioned the Fed minutes, participants indicated yesterday that one of the problems they had was they were waiting for Trump policies to come into place. Do you think that those policies, when you think of tariffs, potentially deportations, immigration, this can be inflationary? Is it going to hold back the Fed from cutting rates?
Well, to the extent that team transitory at the Fed is still has any credibility, I would say that tariffs, if they have any price adjustments, are the most transitory thing there are. So I don't think that should hold them back very long. And I would point out that depending on what number you want to use, 10, 20 million people who came across the border, we had the worst inflation in 40 years when we added 10 or 20 million people. So I'm not sure why people are saying that it's inflationary to tell them to go home.
So when you look at team transitory, do you think the next move for them would be a cut?
Anne-Marie, I have said publicly that I will talk about what the Fed has done. When I was a market commentator and investor, I would talk about what they should do. Now I will leave it to them, and Chair Powell and I have a weekly breakfast. We saw each other yesterday, and I will convey my thoughts there.
Well, let's talk about what they have done. We can comment on that. You said you're willing to. They cut rates 100 basis points going into the end of last year, and an odd thing happened. Yields at the long end rose, they didn't decline. Do you think Federal Reserve easing contributed to higher long end yields?
Well, Jonathan, I would just say the point of cutting rates is to cut rates. So if they cut rates and rates went up, then there probably was something there. I thought that the rate cut in September, I said it maybe even on your show here, that it was oversized. The market responded, but now we're seeing term premium come back down. So we'll see what happens from here.
Do you think the current rate right now is enough to bring down 10-year yields over time just by virtue of being restrictive?
Again, I'm not going to comment on current policy.
I am curious. You talk about how you do look at the 10-year yield every single day. I love that. I love that you're the top bond salesman in the United States. And I'm wondering, are you expecting it or hoping it to go down from here? Is that necessary to achieve your 3% growth target?
Well, what's necessary are the underlying conditions. So the underlying conditions that we need for yields to come down, for growth to go back up. We've got this affordability crisis in housing. We've got an affordability crisis in the auto payments. So one thing that would be very stimulative, and as Jonathan mentioned earlier, the 10 years come down, or rates have come down every week since Donald Trump's been president. So if we can continue that for 52 weeks, that'd be great. And it'd be it would be a win for the American people, which at the end of the day, that is our goal. So if we do what we say we're going to do, if we can rein in the budget deficit, if we have non-inflationary growth, if we bring down energy prices, and I think now that I have the numbers on the inside, there was a big contributor to this massive inflation was regulation. I think you said earlier this morning that what if these things cause inflation? As Anne-Marie just said, some of the policies. Well, what really happened under the previous administration was you created a demand shock with government spending, but it was met by supply constraints as there was more regulation. In Trump 1.0, we created a demand shock with tax cuts, and it was met by a supply-side response of less regulation. So, the Biden administration created this inflation that a demand shock and constraining supply is the ultimate recipe for inflation. So.
And now you want to cut spending. The DOGE program, let's talk about it. You've called it one of the most important audits to government ever. You remember that Clinton tried something similar, the National Partnership for Reinventing Government. How different will this be? And what kind of cost savings are you and the team thinking about?
Yeah, and John, I can go all the way back. Given my tenure in the business, I can go all the way back to the 80s to the Grace Commission. And they had some great ideas, most of them not implemented. I think that the Clinton-Gore initiative, I think a lot of that was academics. So this is people on the ground, all areas of government, and it's moving quickly. And I really do think it's unfortunate that it's been lampooned and attacked the way it has. But when it's being attacked like this, it tells me that there are a lot of entrenched interest in terms, when you're moving people's cheese, they don't like it. And it's not their cheese, it's the American people's cheese.
Well, how about putting some of that cheese back into American people's pockets? How inflationary would those $5,000 potential DOGE checks be that the president spoke about yesterday?
Well, I think, again, that if we are bringing down energy prices, if we are cutting the regulation, so I think that it's to quote the vice president during the campaign, I think it's holistic, and I think that it's all kind of one mosaic. If you were to inject a lot of money into the economy, because Anne-Marie, think about this: that we are at this massive deficit to GDP, 6.7, almost 7%. So what will be happening on one side? You'll be bringing down that spending in the economy. So, very easy mental model is every 300 billion is about 1% of GDP. So every 300 billion that DOGE is able to save, could you put that back in the economy into people's pockets?
One thing potentially that could happen, and people are questioning it, is maybe remarking gold. Elon Musk, who's leading DOGE, was talking about maybe going to Fort Knox to make sure those gold reserves are there. That comes under your purview. Do you have any plans to visit Kentucky?
I don't have any plans. I can tell you that we do an audit every year. I can tell the American people on camera right now that there was a report September 30th, 2024. All the gold is there. Any U.S. senator who wants to come and visit it can arrange a visit through our office.
Gold was your biggest holding when you were a hedge fund manager before you divested to become the Treasury Secretary. So you know the value of where gold is right now versus where it's marked on its balance sheet, just north of $40 an ounce. It's close to $3,000. Is it under consideration for this administration to revalue gold?
I think that somehow when we were talking about the sovereign wealth fund and I said monetize the balance sheet, I can promise you that's not what I had in mind.
So it's not under consideration, not on the table?
That's not what I had in mind.
When you look at the DOGE savings that you have so far, how much is that going to go to offset some of the tax extensions that we see? What other savings are you looking at that potentially are crucial?
Well, again, they're just getting started, and one of the shocking things to me has been, when we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, we all think of what comes out of D.C. We think of some waste and fraud and friction costs, because one way to think about this is 25% of the U.S. economy flows through Washington, D.C. So if we can cut the friction on that, that's a lot of savings. We are discovering now, in waste, fraud, and abuse, there may be much more fraud going on than we thought. And I think you're going to be hearing about that over the coming weeks.
Can we hear about it now?
I think you're going to be hearing about it over the coming weeks.
What kind of fraud are you thinking about? What kind of fraud have you identified?
Again, I'd refer you to some.
Well, you're here now, so I want to see some of it out of you.
I'd refer you to some of the statements by Lee Zeldin at the EPA.
Okay. Well, we can build on that in the weeks to come.
Great.
I'm going to refer to you some comments from the Washington Post on defense cuts. They're reporting that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, ordered senior leaders at the Pentagon and throughout the US military to develop plans for cutting 8% from the defense budget in each of the next 5 years. Are you aware of that plan?
I'm in contact with Secretary Hegseth, and we're working very closely. And again, I'm not going to jump the gun here on TV, but I think everything's on the table. And can things work more efficiently?
When it comes to the defense budget, we spent more last year on our interest payments than defense. So are you hoping for 2025 to spend more on defense than the interest payments?
Well, it would depend how we got there, too. Does defense spending go down? Does the interest bill go down? We'll see what that calculus is.
Got to focus on tariffs too. Revenue raising is a part of that story. Reciprocity, national security. You want fair trade. I think we all want fair trade. The president has discussed reciprocal tariffs. He's mentioned the Europeans also offered to drop auto tariffs. Could we start there? Have the Europeans actually made that offer? Can you confirm that?
I haven't seen that, but it's possible. I think that good thing about President Trump's negotiating style is people put things that were not on the table before on the table very quickly.
So that would be reciprocity and maybe negotiating. But to offset the tax cuts, where's the revenue raising?
So there could be, not everyone is going to give on every point, right? So the Europeans seemingly put forward very quickly auto tariffs, but not every country is going to do that. My view, as I've said before, China is the most unbalanced economy in the history of the world, and they are trying to export their way out of what is a very serious recession, and the rest of the world can't do that. They can't dump Chinese goods. They're going to have to rebalance their economy. So tariffs on Chinese goods went up 10%. And a lot of that, again, Mexico, Canada, China, that was in response to the fentanyl crisis.
China's the only one, though, that those tariffs have actually stayed in place. Is that the opening salvo? How high do you think Trump wants to go when it comes to Chinese tariffs?
Well, I'm not going to give away his negotiating hand on TV. I do have my first call with my Chinese counterpart tomorrow morning, so I look forward to a very productive discussion.
What's the first point you want to bring up?
That we want to work together. And as we said, a lot of the precursor ingredients from fentanyl originate in China. So we really want to put a stop to that very quickly.
Historically, there's been some currency concerns with regards to China as well. In the conversations we had you before taking up this post with you, you mentioned that some countries, some currencies are undervalued. Is China one of them? Is that something you'd like to remedy?
Yeah, well, Jonathan, what I've said is, make no mistake, the U.S. still has a strong dollar policy, but that does not mean that bilaterally other countries can weaken their currencies versus the dollar or manipulate their currencies. So, but specifically on China, China's a very difficult currency to value, because I really think that when we think about the value of the RMB, it's in 3 different equilibrium. You know, on any academic model, say purchasing power parity, it's cheap. On the other side, you have 1.4 billion people who are subject to capital controls, and they want to get some of their money out of the country. And then you have what I would call the X factor. If you put money into China today, what's your belief that you will get it out in 2, 3, 4 years? So it's very difficult to come up with a point value of the currency.
You've talked about the desire to have a strong dollar policy for the United States, but is a strong dollar at odds with the idea of bringing industrial production back to the United States, and sort of speaks to some of the concerns about other countries trying to devalue their currencies?
Well, I think that we will necessarily have a strong dollar if we run good policies, and I think we're going to run good policies. If we cut the trade deficits, when you think about the trade deficit is a combination of terms of trade, value of the dollar, and our own budget deficit. So if we bring down the budget deficit, then I think everyone, if we are deregulating, if we make the tax cuts permanent, if we make the U.S. more business friendly, then all the reserve managers in the world, all the private investors are going to want a piece of that, and the dollar will be strong, but we will be able to push back on that through good policies, through productivity. The U.S. productivity, I think, I've been meeting with a lot of the tech leaders lately, and I think we are very close to the cusp of this AI finally coming into the productivity numbers.
Do you think that a strong dollar is necessary in order to offset some of the costs that could be otherwise associated with the tariffs?
Traditional economic theory would tell you that the dollar strengthens on the tariffs, but who knows what we've already seen since the dollar appreciation since November 5th. Markets live in the future, so have we already priced in some of that? And on the other side, what we are trying to do is to get other economies to successfully rebalance. My conversation tomorrow with and this is really just an introductory conversation, but as we go down the road, the Chinese need to rebalance their economy in favor of consumption. That they are suppressing the consumer in favor of the business community. So, as that happens, then they will increase their demand. Same thing in Europe. Mario Draghi, for any of your viewers who didn't see it, Mario Draghi had a fantastic editorial this weekend in the Financial Times where he said, look, we have put the equivalent of more tariffs on ourselves, more tariffs on ourselves than the U.S. could ever contemplate. So could you get a very strong euro if somehow they had an immaculate deregulation?
Just quickly, you're having this call with your Chinese counterpart. Will you see him next week at the G20 finance ministers meeting?
I'm not going to Cape Town due to some domestic considerations. I actually think that he's not attending either.
You don't think is that what he's told you?
This is the readout that we've gotten.
Okay.
So, and again, I also believe several of my other counterparts won't be there. I have been speaking and in contact with them regularly, and then I will be seeing them at the spring IMF World Bank meetings in D.C.
Wanted to talk to you about national security as well, and the dollar has certainly got a role to play on that front. The sanctions policy of the United States. As we look back, do you think that's been misused, abused?
Yeah, excellent question, Jonathan. That when I came into Treasury, if you think about sort of Treasury is five pieces. There's IRS on one side, the Mint on the other, but the main focus of in the building at Treasury is domestic finance, international finance. That's what I've been doing for my career for 35 years. I was able to hit the ground running on that. What we call TFI, terrorism finance, is where my biggest learning curve is. So I'm spending a lot of time on that, and I'm reviewing the sanctions policies. Why do we do what we do? Have they been effective? Are we running a 21st century program as opposed to some outdated modalities?
Well, the current sanctions are in place on places like Russia to try to get Putin to a negotiating table. You are intricately involved in this deal. You were just in Kyiv. You met with President Zelensky. Trump yesterday called Zelensky a dictator without these elections and said that he better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Does this language make it harder for you to get that minerals deal over the finish line?
Well, look, I think President Zelensky, unfortunately, escalated and has put some daylight between.
How did he escalate?
A lot of his remarks in Munich, I thought were inappropriate. President Zelensky, when I met with him, assured me that he'd be signing the minerals deal in Munich. He has not. And look, the real purpose here, and I think it's turned into kind of this media circus, that President Trump had a very elegant plan, and it was bring the Ukrainians closer to the U.S. Let's do this economic deal. And even Karl Rove in the Wall Street Journal this morning approves of it, that the U.S., with greater economic interest in Ukraine, provides a security shield. So the sequencing of what was going to happen was bring the Ukrainians closer to the U.S. Through economic ties, convince the American people and the American public, get them on side, and then tell the Russians, go to the negotiating table with a very fulsome message that if we need to, we will take sanctions up.
Well, what about tapping the Russian frozen assets, some $300 billion? Would you force your European counterparts to not just have them frozen, but actually tap them? Trump talks about repaying the American taxpayer. Shouldn't Russia be a part of that?
Well, what's happening now is they are being tapped. So the returns from
the interest,
the returns from the freezed asset pile is going to pay the Europeans. What's very important to understand here is that everything the U.S. has done to date, the American people, the American taxpayer, is grants. The Europeans, roughly half of what they've done are loans, and the runoff from the frozen assets is being used to repay European loans.
Have you communicated that to the Europeans, that you're upset with them?
What's that?
Have you communicated to the Europeans that you're upset with them?
I think Vice President Vance did a pretty good job in Munich.
Do you think they understand that the United States is running a deficit of north of 6%, close to 7%, and that the budget for defense is north of $800 billion? Do you think they understand the gravity of the moment in the United States, the U.S. perspective?
Look, I think that they understand that President Trump, during his first term, this term, Vice President Vance, and the entire security apparatus have told them that many of the countries are deficient in their NATO spending, and they need to come up. When I went to Ukraine, you fly into Poland. Poland is spending almost 5% of GDP on defense. And look at Poland sitting next to Ukraine. Poland is one of the great economic success stories of the past 30 years. After China, they've had the fastest growth. So why couldn't Ukraine, with some U.S. capital, ingenuity, know-how, and root out some of the corruption, do as well as their neighbors done?
If Europe spends more, will it allow America to cut back on defense spending? Is that the ultimate goal?
The ultimate goal is for the Europeans to come up to where they've said that they are going to, and to provide their share of the NATO spending.
You mentioned sanctions. So do you have both on the table ready to go, a sanctions ramp up or wind down on Russia, depending how these talks go?
I think that'd be a very good characterization.
when it comes to the talks, Trump still thinks he's going to meet with Putin, he said probably by the end of the month. The end of the month is next week. Are you preparing for that?
I'm not going to give away the timetable, but the president is committed to ending this conflict very quickly. And I will tell you, you're in Kyiv. I went to a children's hospital that had been bombed. And this was not a children's hospital where you take your child if he or she scrapes their knee. Like this was. So
you can imagine. I did that trip that you're talking about just a few months ago. You can imagine why they haven't had elections then, right? They're living in this martial law.
They are, and it's probably necessary to move forward with the democratic process.
We've covered a lot of topics. One name that has not come up very much is Elon Musk. Let's finish there. You've had some tremendous colleagues in your experience over your career, including the great investor Stanley Druckenmiller. You've worked alongside Donald Trump through the campaign. Can you just describe what it's like to work with someone like Elon Musk, someone as successful in American business? Just what's that like day to day?
Yeah, look, Elon Musk, like Stan Druckenmiller, I always compare the great business people to great athletes. They keep their eye on the prize. Whether he's the Messi or Michael Jordan, he is focused and his energy level is unbelievable. And he's gotten to where he has because everything's on the table. There's always this examination of why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing what we're doing? And most of all, if something's not working, let's fix it.
Sam Altman was on Bloomberg TV just 2 weeks ago and called Elon Musk insecure. Do you view him as such?
I'm not going to get into the tech magnate. Kind of slap fest.
Secretary Bessent, I would say that's wise.
Yep.
He is drawing criticism, though. When you and the administration come out and pick out the various things where money has been wasted on, I think we can all agree that that's a waste of money. Where there might be some concern is the way that some people are being laid off in Washington, that it lacks some dignity. Could you comment on that today?
Look, I think that there are many fine public servants, but I think that I've been in Washington 3 or 4 weeks now, and there's a real bias towards the status quo. And if you don't move quickly, then the lobbyists get involved, the entrenched interest, and it's impossible to get anything done. So anyone who has experienced financial hardship, any kind of the mental duress, I'm sorry for them, but that's also what the average American experiences every day. Most of us, you all come to work, you want good ratings, you get a performance readout, you really push forward. And I can tell you that in Treasury, I have been so impressed with the quality of the permanent staff. And I want to get everybody back to the office, and a lot of people are on board with that.
When it comes to your prior life, you didn't have a boss. You said it would be like atrophy if you weren't trading financial markets every single day. What is it like now to be in this position where you make decisions that people can trade against what you're doing, and you also have a boss that sits pretty close to you in terms of the Treasury Department and the West Wing?
Well, look, I only had my own firm for 8 years, so I worked with Mr. Soros, with Stan Druckenmiller, and it's a great feedback mechanism. And I think I have the best position in D.C. I'm on the White House campus. We have a great staff in Treasury. I can be in the Oval in 4 minutes, and so there's proximity. And again, not like Elon Musk, President Trump is committed to shaking up the status quo. He came in with a mandate, and he's moving on it very quickly.
You're a total gentleman, and you've been very gracious with your time. Thanks for being a good friend to this programme over the last year. Secretary Bessent there of the Treasury. Secretary Bessent, thank you, sir.